From Immersive Labs, this is Cyberhumanity.
Hello again, I'm your host Chris Pace, joined once again by my colleagues Max Vetter.
Hello.
Kev Breen.
Hello.
And finally, Paul Bentham.
Hello.
In these podcasts, we try to look at cybersecurity from a human point of view, social engineering, hacker motivations, industry trends, and more. And these podcasts essentially come in two flavours, either us ranting about themes close to the hearts of security types, or us chatting about threat and security stuff from recent weeks. And this episode is another one of those. And we're going to start off by the story that has been dominating the headlines, mainly because it's a security vendor. People always like it when security vendors take a little stumble. And it's remote code execution in this F5 appliance. What's going on, Kev? Why? And also, why is there so much noise about it? Everyone is shouting and stamping about this.
Yeah, so this one, F5, big IP, so this is another one of those gateway devices, so this is designed to sit on the edge of your network, although it's not designed to be publicly facing, which some of them are. So this one is, it's a combination of a couple of different vulnerabilities that ends up giving them a perfect storm. And if you exploit this, you get full code execution on this gateway device, and this has your SSL certificates, your TLS, your private keys. If you get access to this, you've got access to a lot of sensitive data. And it's really, really trivial.
So why so trivial? They've obviously left something obvious.
The why we can get to in a second, but it is really trivial. So it's a directory traversal attack, it's a really old school attack. This is something that should be really easy to spot and fix. And that itself leads to auth bypass, and then once you've got auth bypass, you can run any command as if you're on there, and they've got commands in there that allow you to read, write files, run commands. It's pretty bad. But when we started looking at this, so we don't have F5, but obviously we want to write the lab on it, so started doing the research, and I ran just a out of the box open source static code analyzer and got 5,500 hits. Now, a lot of those are going to be false positives, but there's a lot of bad coding practice in there just all the way through this thing.
Yeah, they're quite old as well, aren't they, Kev? I mean, they were developed they've been around for quite some time, and people use them. I mean, in previous guises, I've had developers work for me that have been using the Big Five Big IP, F5 Big IP products, and they're so complicated to configure. They're hard products to use.
They're monolithic beasts, and just going through the code review while we were trying to. So when this released, there was no POC. They just released mitigations. So it was the race to go from mitigation to exploitation, which took us 5 or 6 hours, and attackers they were about the same pace. This is actively being exploited in the wild, which is why it's getting picked up again.
Do you know how many are deployed out there? How many? Because they are relied upon to be that kind of gateway device before people get into your web apps and stuff.
So I did a quick showdown scan looking for those that have been exposed to the internet. So there's going to be a lot more than this, but these are the ones that are accidentally or deliberately misconfigured. There's about 7,500, 8,000 of them currently exposed to the internet. And if you think about the companies that are using this, this isn't small orgs.
They're not cheap, are they?
They're not cheap. This is large organizations running these.
Anyone want to volunteer what is particularly unusual about this CVE?
Is this a question you know the answer to?
I do. It's a loaded question. I'm hoping someone else might know it.
Is it a number?
It's rare. It's rare, and it involves a number associated with it.
Is it 2020 1 2 3 4?
No.
It's 2020 5902. It's a perfect 10 for CVSS as well.
There we are. It's a perfect 10 for
CVSS,
which is it happens, but it is pretty rare. And I think also this week then there was a 10 out of 10. There was a 10 for a Palo Alto bug as well, right? Which is kind of a similar thing.
And we've seen Citrix. We know Citrix have had some issues in the recent past, but they've just released another round of advisories, and there's some critical stuff in there as well. We're seeing a lot of these big gateway appliances, these big security appliances falling foul to arguably some fairly simple exploits that code review should pick these things up.
The other thing that's weird, it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm searching for conspiracies. But US Cyber Command came out and said the Palo Alto vuln is really bad, and it's probably going to be targeted by nation-state actors. Okay?
They know something.
Especially, please patch immediately, especially if you're using SAML. That was what they came out and said, which is sort of loaded because they didn't say anything about the F5 one. So they've come out and said, we think that nation-state hacking groups are likely to exploit this thing, which is code for nation-state groups are already exploiting this thing, but we can't say who they are. And it's obviously something to do with SAML, the way that it's being exploited. And then they tweeted to say, foreign APTs will likely attempt to exploit soon.
Is this another example of them being really super slow, though? Or was that an actual one that... Because didn't we have a few examples where there was like a vulnerability in March and they were tweeting about it in June?
No, this is
this week, is it?
Yeah, so this Palo Alto vulnerability, which is CVE 2020-2021, so that's very recent. And this one also has a 10 out of 10 CVSS. And my understanding is that the way that it works is pretty similar to the F5 vulnerability, but it's just odd that that's the one that Cyber Command have decided they're going to come out and recommend that people patch rather than F5. I just didn't know if there was any rationale behind that.
They did push out an advisory. It might not have been as strong, but they definitely did. NCSC did the same. They pushed out an advisory saying patch the F5 stuff.
I suppose the context here is that they're saying they are using the words, nation state actors are likely to that's exploit this vulnerability. Yeah.
Any guesses for so this was the F5 was actively exploited in the wild within over the weekend, over the 4th of July weekend. Any guesses on what was first delivered or was first observed in honeypot?
Come on, you've got to be joking me. I cannot. So hang on. We've just had a conversation.
All the big money is in crypto miner.
Cryptocurrency mining, honestly. And the thing is that the US Cyber Command, on this Palo Alto one, they've taken the time to craft this statement to let everyone know that it's going to be exploited by highly sophisticated nation state actors. Meanwhile, over in F5 land, cryptocurrency miners, everyone, welcome to the most sophisticated threat that 2020 has to offer, your computing power being used to generate highly volatile digital currency.
It's kind of nice because if it's really obvious to spot one of your nodes is going to start spiking CPU, so it gives you a nice detection. It doesn't do significant amounts of damage. You haven't lost the world like an APT would come in. So they're doing us a favor. They're forcing companies to patch quicker than they might otherwise.
And it gives those criminals more money, which, as we all know, is great because then they do more cyber badness, and then it's great for the industry, right? Is that how it works?
Paul's theme of encouraging all illegal activities.
It also does depend how much the value of that particular currency is on that particular day. I think judging by recent market performance, they may not be making all that much. All right, so basically, if you got F5 or Palo Alto, it's pretty bad, you should probably patch it. Is that what we learned?
Patch it.
Patch it.
If you can't,
we need to get a jingle made for that.
If you can't patch, at least apply the mitigations. Although the mitigations were bypassed within 48 hours as well. But they released new mitigations.
So don't bother doing that then. Kev's waste a load of your time doing mitigations that have already been bypassed.
So one of the really annoying things, and we're getting a little bit off topic, but so when I was starting to look at, so F5, this is it compromised, how would I detect it? Let's look at the logs. No, they have barely minimal logging on this thing. It's a 20 meg file. As soon as that 20 meg's done, that's it, no more logs. It just circles over. So there's just so many little things from a security appliance or from something that should be secure that just fails.
We didn't really talk about the Citrix one. Are we just giving? Is it like Citrix is just as bad as WebEx, and we just like accept that it's basically malware, and we don't talk about it anymore?
Oh, WebEx is terrible. I mean, it's unrelated. It's unrelated, but it's worth a rant. WebEx is the worst bit of video conferencing software that has ever existed, isn't it? It's terrible. Not only is there always a hideous delay every time you use the VoIP feature, I feel like it wants to install its app every single time I use it. Yeah,
so it is
like,
malware. WebEx
really
is malware.
annoying.
I think it probably has more CVEs than lines of code.
I'm just checking, but I'm pretty sure there's a very recent one, June 17th.
There we go.
RCE and WebEx.
Wow.
People use it still. Stop
But nobody's bitching. Like, there's no. Sorry, I swore.
Oh, Kevin.
Kev.
Your mum's
You
listening.
just said bitching. I've left worse in than that, my friend.
But Twitter isn't a buzz. Like, there's no Zoom level equivalent of, oh my God, burn down WebEx's headquarters.
So
no one
people
uses
accept it. People accept it's malware. They know. If you install WebEx, you know that you're just going to get owned. It's just, that's part of the deal.
You're in a slightly aged company that's using WebEx.
Well, or you're having to work with an aged company, which is the reason why I find myself installing this sodding thing.
Yeah.
All right, we don't usually talk too much about industry trends and stuff like that. We tend to focus on more threaty things. But something caught my eye this week. It was a bit of research out of IBM, which basically said that the statistics from their report seem to say that the more money that you spend on security solutions, the less effective your security is, basically.
Apart from our one.
Yes, but well, I mean, I was gonna get to that, but in a much more subtle way than you just did.
Did I crave our product reference in?
Were you just about to? Were you just about to? Okay, a word from our sponsors continually, just the whole thing. But basically, they've done this global survey, with like thousands and thousands of responses. So they talked to lots of professionals in the industry, and it says that while organisations are improving in planning, detection, and response, actually organisations' ability to contain an active threat has declined by 13%. And on average, and this really did open my eyes, on average, enterprises deploy 45 cybersecurity related tools on their network. And the idea is that the suggestion being made is that the widespread use of too many tools could actually be contributing to an inability not just to detect something, but also to be able to effectively defend as well. And this is where the stats really start to tell. Enterprises that deploy over 50 tools rank themselves 8% lower in their ability to detect threats and 7% lower in their defensive capabilities. Now, I actually think there's something else in that, but I just think it's interesting that there does seem to be this correlation between the amount of stuff that gets thrown into security and then how effective, security organizations actually are, and why that might be.
I mean, most security teams, they're loss makers in a company anyway. They cost you lots of money in terms of the manpower, in terms of training, in terms of appliances and software and stuff like that anyway. So there's always been that kind of connotation with it.
What I find interesting about this is, last time I brought up a document in the podcast, I got absolutely mercilessly ripped for bringing it up. And here is Chris bringing up a document. Oh, look, it's interesting that the more tech you buy, the less secure you feel.
Your supposed report told us absolutely nothing about anything.
Data breach investigations report. It was brilliant.
Yes, that told us that breaches were caused by things being breached. That's incredibly useful. Yeah.
This is CISOs who are paranoid, isn't it? The more paranoid you are, the more tools you buy, the more locks you put on your door, and you spend more money. And then your poor defenders are getting overwhelmed by the number of alerts they're getting, the amount of different views that you're getting from those different tools. And of course, how do you know what the truth is? There's so much going on.
False positive fatigue is a real thing. I've been in some of these companies where you've got lots of different things reporting in, and as an analyst, as a junior analyst, when I first started out, trying to make sense of all of this stuff coming in, trying to correlate across even just 5 or 6 different tools is incredibly hard to do. Never mind 45.
They must spend a fortune on their engineers, like maintaining and patching all these tools. Can you imagine having 55 of these appliances? You're going to have to keep up to date, patched, paying them
Seems like
licenses.
if they got Citrix F5 or Palo Alto, they probably haven't got to them yet, have they? But I was going to echo what you were just saying there about, so you were talking about the paranoid CISO. I think that is why the more tools bought, they have given themselves a higher bar. So they've basically said, we've bought more stuff and invested more energy and invested more money. So therefore, we should be better, but we've fundamentally don't. So we've given ourselves a higher bar, but we don't think we're doing as well as we could be. So therefore, we spend more money. So it's actually kind of it's a vicious circle of continuing to spend in order to try to make security better. What I also thought was interesting coming out of this report from IBM is that they've said, 74% of the people who responded said their planning posture basically they didn't feel was up to scratch. They weren't really not either defined plans or ad hoc plans, or there was inconsistency in how they were supposed to respond. Only a third that had adopted a response plan had created a playbook for common attack types. Now, I think that this is probably a thing they're trying to sell, but I think this is the next big thing. I think the next big thing is not just having an incident response plan that you follow. The next thing then is having defined pathways that are to respond to a particular incident type. And it would seem obvious to me that if you're spending money on 45 security tools, that's a thing that you could do as an organization probably.
And if you don't want to pay any money for it, incidentresponse.com, free playbooks.
Yeah, exactly. You can go and find the documentation. Just interesting that organisations that are spent. And if you worked it out, you could probably work out what that equates to in terms of budget. Those 45 cybersecurity tools to invest some money in, creating a plan that everyone is familiar with and understands. Could reap a significantly bigger reward than ploughing more money into tech.
I'd also like to see on that survey whether because obviously it's causation or correlation, right? Is maybe they're bigger organizations, so they have more diverse security and it's harder to secure it, so that's why they're more at risk, rather than actually the more tools is completely linked to them being more vulnerable.
It's probably because they're using WebEx.
There are some other interesting little nuggets in here that would be interesting to get your guys' views on. 39% of enterprise companies who had an incident response plan applied have experienced a severely disruptive attack in the last 2 years. 62% who didn't have a plan. So basically, the more prepared the suggestion is, the more prepared you are, the less likely to be disruptive an attack is. I think that's what it's getting at.
That seems to make sense, doesn't it? Because obviously it won't just be the incident response plan. You'll have if you're doing that as well, you'll probably have better security all round. So you're even less likely for an incident to hit you, because you've got security across the board. That's better.
And if you've got playbooks in place and you've got plans in place, you've probably tested them, or you've hopefully tested them, which means that when an incident kicks in, because you're always going to get an incident, you're going to be more used to how you should deal with it, and you're going to know your processes a bit better. Even just writing that document gets somebody in the mindset of understanding how they should respond to it.
It's the standard thing, isn't it? If something's hard to do, just do it more often. If you've got an incident, if you have lots of incidents, you are going to execute that playbook more often. You are going to remember how to execute that playbook, and then it's not going to be a surprise when you have an incident, because you're doing it all the time. It's the same for everything. It's why Netflix have Chaos Monkey that goes in and destroys servers in their AWS estate, because then the whole system has to be able to adopt to a server going down, and then if it's hard to do it more often.
I did not know that was a thing that they had, but that sounds incredibly cool.
Well, they have a Chaos Monkey. Yeah, this is all DevOps stuff. They have Chaos Monkey. I think they even have a Chaos Gorilla.
So it sounds to me like you're saying the Chaos Monkey is basically like a failure. It's a it's
Yeah,
a simulated. It's a simulated failure.
The Chaos Monkey is literally a piece of software that they run in AWS and that kills some of their nodes in their estate. It's all about scale out. So you treat your servers like cattle rather than pets. The servers then get killed by the Chaos Monkey. And of course, what you're testing in that situation is that your application, your system adapts to the fact that that server's gone down. Then the Chaos Gorilla, I think, probably takes out a bigger service, and I think there's like Chaos King Kong or something that takes out whole AWS region. And I think that's Netflix's way of keeping up testing against their resilience plan inside their infrastructure. And of course, I think cybersecurity people should be doing the same.
Definitely.
It's not just cybersecurity people. Slack did a really strong write-up a couple of weeks ago on how they handled an incident, and that was just a DevOps deployment went wrong. It caused a spike. It caused some load and traffic issues, and they released exactly like what they did, how they did it. So it's when Slack goes down, Slack themselves had to switch to Zoom, of all things, to keep themselves going, to keep themselves communicating. And it's a really strong write-up.
Like, we are well off topic here, but that write-up about how Slack responds to an incident was spot on. And of course, they have to switch to Zoom, because if Slack's down, which is their default, they're going to go somewhere that's separate, which is kind of brilliant, because you've got to think about those things. Like, if you're used to communicating in the office, in a meeting room, but your Chaos Monkey has closed the office, how do you handle, like, we all get in a boardroom? Well, not today, you don't. Okay, well, then I ring. Well, actually, the phone lines are down. Oh, what am I going to do? Like, thinking about those playbooks, and it's not just like, oh, this is what we do, because then we'll get an alert. And it's like randomizing it and being super creative. And it's Chaos Kong.
Chaos Kong.
Cool. So there was some debate before we started recording about how we would approach this next segment. There's been, obviously, with the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement globally, we have seen lots of things come under scrutiny. Language that we use, perhaps some of that language that we've taken for granted, and that our industry is not immune to that. And one of the areas that has been discussed in great length across social media, certainly, is the idea of removing some terminology like blacklist, whitelist, master and slave, even black hat as a way of thinking about a conference or an organization. And I just wanted to ask you guys kind of what our feelings are about that. And actually, Kev, what I'm really interested in getting from you is how this term, there is the proposal that this terminology changes. So not just saying, well, it shouldn't be this, but what do we do instead? Because that is terminology that everyone's familiar with.
I think before we even get into some of the terminology, I think we have to recognise that we're four white men talking about a topic. And I'm going to be honest with you, like when it all like really peaked, I think it was around about the blackout time on social media, and the question, like, I've always felt that I was kind of colourblind. But I didn't really understand what. I didn't really understand it, and I thought, I'm colourblind. I don't understand why this has all become a big deal. I'm not a racist, and I felt pretty ignorant. And I think it's difficult for us. InfoSec's got the same problem. I guess it's a white male-dominated industry, and so I'm imagining lots of people probably feel like me on this, and I think challenged a lot by my colleagues, but also just by my own like feeling of didn't want to feel stupid. I went out and bought Why I'm Not Talking to White People About Race Anymore, and that's a fantastic book, and it does sort of highlight, and when you read it through and you listen to the experiences of black people, this is written by a black woman in the UK, but I'm sure it's the same globally. Like you realize how sort of endemic some of the structural racism that's just from history through slave owners. Like, we are a company based in Bristol, and right there in the heart of Bristol was a statue of a man celebrating the fact that he took people from Africa and took them to the plantations. And we had a statue about him, like, which when you look at it and think about it, it just feels utterly ridiculous to celebrate that. But black people are having to put up with that sort of symbolism and those aspects every single day. And like, I think what I've seen, I'm a big Formula One fan, and I'm seeing Lewis Hamilton doing the same with Formula One, and he's challenging this kind of, like, it's not just colourblindness, which we're sort of trying to talk about here. We're trying to talk about being anti-racist.
Yeah.
And I think when you put it in that context, and then you think, well, if it's a bad thing, we call it a blacklist. And if it's a good thing, we call it a whitelist. And the same with, if you're a good hacker, you're a white hat hacker. If you're a bad hacker, you're a black hat hacker. Like, this language is just, it's out of date now, I think.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is that it's embedded. So people are comfortable with it, and they've been comfortable with it for a long time. And so once we get to a place where we say, where we might say, well, actually, it doesn't. We're not wedded enough to it, and we recognise that it's inappropriate and potentially harmful in the context of the world we live in today. Let's find an alternative.
Yeah,
there are
absolutely.
Another group of people who are ready to say, no, it's always been called this, and it should still carry on being called this.
But nobody's saying that by calling it blacklist, you're a racist. Nobody's saying that. Nobody who uses blacklist is like a racist. Of course not. But what they're doing is, it's that white privilege is that we don't see it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No.
And that's the point, I think.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. So, like, I hadn't even considered it. So, like, blacklist, whitelist, they're not colloquialisms in cyber. These are terms that were taught to me from when I first started to learn. So for me, it was just a language. I didn't even make the association until until we saw, like, Twitter, and it was actually NCSC back in, like, March or April or May, like, before some of this kicked off. NCSC had already come out and said that we're starting to change the way we look at it. And it wasn't until somebody mentioned it that I thought, like, actually, I hadn't seen that perspective. But, like, as soon as you say it, you can't not see it.
And I think the thing for me is that changing language like this, which means nothing to me. I'm not like, oh my God, I'm going to die in a hell about the fact that we're calling it black or whitelist. Like, and it's just the same. Like, I'm a child of the 80s, and like some of the stuff that, like, came out, like, from Leicestershire, where there was a lot of Indian population. Some of the stuff that was said on the playground in my dominant white school was just ridiculous in the 80s, and the fact that the teachers sort of let it go was, like, seemed okay at the time. You fast forward to the early 2000s, and Max and I were talking about this earlier this week. Chris Moyles, like that bastion of like morality, but he was the number one DJ on Radio 1, and he used the phrase "gay" to describe something as rubbish. That's so gay, which at the time was deemed acceptable by the BBC Board of Trustees. Like, fast forward 14 years, like, that is just so ridiculous. Like, coming out of Pride Month, and how important it is for us to respect that diversity within our own workforce and within the wider community. Just completely unacceptable. And I think it should still be this. It should be the case with all of these words as well.
Like you said, what's in a word? It's just a word, and that's the thing, is like the new terminology that people are suggesting actually makes more sense and is easier to understand.
What are they suggesting? What's the new?
So, and this is the one thing that annoys me about this coming out, is that everybody's coming out. So NCSC, Twitter, they've come out, Cisco, but they've all come out with a slightly different phrase.
Of course they have. They're going to try and trade the
market. It's the malware names all over again.
So we have like the concept of allow list and deny list, which they fundamentally make more sense and they're easier to understand. But there's slight variance. So there's allow list and deny list, or there's allow list and block list.
Yeah.
Like, I get that they're the same thing, but what I'd really love to see is somebody coming out and going, like, this is, like, put it in the textbook, like, this is what we teach, this is the way that we standardize it, and then everybody understands it.
You know what's odd? We've started off talking about a new thing being brought to light, in terms of the world that we're now living in, and people's conscience, and we've just ended up returning to a same old problem in information security, which is that everyone wants to own the naming convention. Like, it's the same with Gartner having to decide what a category of a product is called, as it is with a antivirus vendor wanting to own the malware name, as it is with a threat intelligence company wanting to name the APT group. So now we just end up with exactly the same problem, where we're going to create a set of definitions that all are kind of the same, but also sort of different. Great.
But I think that in a way the way the names are make more sense, right? Because black and white list, you need to explain. When I was teaching, I'd explain, well, blacklist is block list and whitelist is accept list or allow list. And so in a way it doesn't matter because they're actually descriptive now. And the same with white hat and black hat. You kind of teach it that, apparently it came from the spaghetti westerns in the kind of 40s and 50s, which probably did originate from a racist place as well. But describing unethical hackers makes so much more sense, and no one has to then go and teach you, a black hat means unethical. So it seems like it's both logic and it's something that again, people getting annoyed at it are the people who it doesn't really affect negatively. So there's no reason why we don't full-heartedly go that way.
The only problem I have with that is that the word unethical is quite hard to say.
Unethical.
Unethical.
Like, what's the name? Like, we don't go to Black Hat because it's called Black Hat. We go to Black Hat for what it represents and the people it brings together and the things they talk about. Although, arguably, we go to Black Hat to go to DEF CON.
You go to Black Hat to go to DEF CON. You go to Black Hat to go to Vegas. You go to Black Hat to go gambling and drinking and go to the free parties. And you'll never convince me otherwise.
And that's why he doesn't care what it's called.
Yeah. Yep. It's just shorthand for getting drunk in Vegas.
Yeah. All right. Also this week, in an operation led by the UK's National Crime Agency, investigators say they have seized £54 million in cash, 2 tons of cocaine, 77 firearms, including assault rifles, submachine guns and grenades, and prevented contract killings. Now, I know what you're thinking. Chris, what has this got to do with cyber? So what? The National Crime Agency doing their job? Well, it turns out that the people involved in this organised criminal network were using an encrypted phone system. Basically, what I think, and I'm imagining that Max knows more about this than I do, but I think they were probably using some sort of specially built mobile phones or some, like, what is it about this system, A, and B, how did the NCA go about actually infiltrating it?
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazing case. So EncroChat was what they were using, and EncroChat used to be an app, but then they started sending out their own, what they call carbon units, which was a whole handset with completely locked down from GPS, camera, microphone, which was designed for privacy. Now, usually these things would be taken up by kind of privacy advocates and human rights as well, but it appears that according to all the news, every single person using EncroChat was a criminal. They said that they haven't found any instance of these people that aren't criminals using it, which is just bizarre for a start. But and the stuff they found, like 746 people arrested. They found a torture chamber in the Netherlands.
In Holland, yeah.
In Holland, they found. Let me just
with a dental chair in the middle of this padded room. It's terrifying.
Sounds like something from a Saw movie.
Yeah, it's just incredible. So what they did, EncroChat uses off-the-record messaging, which is pretty well-known encryption standards, open source. So they did not hack the encryption. Actually, what they did, EncroChat was running through servers. Sorry, go on, Paul.
No, you were just so overexcited. We need to take a step back, Max. You're just like, oh my god, there's so much information.
Yeah.
Who's the they? Who did the hacking?
So a combination of Europol, NCA. So EncroChat had servers in France. What they managed to do wasn't crack the encryption tool. They actually put malware through the servers on France onto the devices.
So they went to the endpoint where the traffic was unencrypted.
Exactly. So end-to-end encryption, as you and others may know, is from your device to the other device. And the servers in France won't have any of that data either. But if you have malware on your device, you can literally read the messages that are being typed. And that's exactly what they did. So they had something like 50% of all the devices on EncroChat had the malware on it.
Wow.
And so they could just literally read all these messages.
And now I know why they're saying that no good users were on EncroChat. That is a Human Rights Act cover, because they know that they can put the malware on all those devices because they're all bad actors, and therefore they've got the warrant to do that. If there was like less than 100% of bad actors, then you'd be breaching the human rights of somebody who shouldn't have that.
60,000 users.
Yeah, which to be honest, I'd be really surprised if they were all criminals. Like that's just not likely, is it? There's going to be some kind of collateral damage in there of people who are just citizens, I would suspect. But they're saying it's fine. It's all criminals.
You say that, but these devices aren't like, they're not sold on high street. They're not easy things to get hold of. They're not cheap, and there are, like, if you're a privacy advocate, there are easier ways of doing it.
Use Tails. I've heard that Tails thing's great.
Yeah.
Just don't watch any videos on it.
And I mean, it would seem that EncroChat, when they suspected infiltration by law enforcement, they did send a message to every user saying, "We think we've been infiltrated by law enforcement. Dispose of the device immediately." So they're probably a bit, they weren't really cleaner than clean. But I quite like about this,
the behind the scenes on this must have been fascinating. When you're in the EncroChat,
would have loved to be on that op.
Well, aid from the law enforcement side, but also to look at the defending side to see something weird's going on these devices. We've got traffic going out the network to this planet. And because I think early on, I think the law enforcement were picking off people, like people that were getting arrested, because of course there's a whole ethical debate that's in law enforcement. I know, Max, you've been there, you probably get this more than I do, but the idea, like, keep the network up. As long as the network's up and we're in, we'll find the people, we'll take them down. But at some point, they'll be like, hang on, like, my mate's just got arrested, and the only way they could have known about him is because I just messaged him. So
I think that's why they made these arrests. So they basically made 46 simultaneous arrests across Europe. So that for that reason it's the same as the Enigma example, right? We cracked the Enigma code, but we had to stay quiet about and not act, even though we know that we've cracked the Enigma code.
Well, that's the fascinating part of the encryption, isn't it? Is if you make the suspects aware that you've cracked it, then you lose your advantage, and so you either have to act straight away or you keep it running. But then I think there's been places in Australia and Canada where they've infiltrated paedophile gangs and they've kept the servers running to catch more, but that's really dodgy ethically, because then you're essentially serving up child abuse images to more people. I think this was a fascinating thing. But in terms of cryptography, this is a massive no-no. Never be part of a network with just criminals. Like I think Al Qaeda tried this. They developed their own encryption standard, which places like GCHQ are like, great, that's amazing, because they're always going to have bugs in them. If it's not open to the public to scrutinize and it's open source, then it's always going to be easier to attack. The thing about WhatsApp and these other devices, it's so many people are using them. Firstly, you can hide in the noise, and then secondly, everyone's checking them to make sure they are secure. So using your own criminals network is the probably stupidest thing.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like anybody doing this is extremely is paranoid in the extreme. It says that the base unit itself was a standard Android handset, but then they installed their own messaging programs on it, and that basically connected them to EncroChat servers. Well, that was where the problem arose. As soon as the servers were accessible or could be accessed in some way, the rest was obvious. But EncroChat would physically remove GPS, camera, microphone from that device, and then the phone also had a feature that enabled them to rapidly wipe the device just by entering a PIN. So basically, if they were going to get arrested, they could just put a PIN in and it would wipe itself.
I think
it had a standard Android OS next to it. Like, it's very cool.
There was actually a flaw where that feature didn't work. So
I think that's how they got detected, Kev. I think the authorities part of the malware blocked the delete thing, and
That's right.
not working was the first clue
sign.
that something was weird was going on. But Chris, they had two operating systems next door to each other. So like in one side of the phone, one part of the phone, it would be normal operation, and then the other part it would be your bad guy stuff.
It's pretty, and the numbers here are pretty mind-blowing. They're saying that it represents one of the largest law enforcement infiltrations of a communications network ever. And they're saying that they investigated more than 100 million encrypted messages sent between users in real time. So they were reading them as they were sending them to each other. If say for example I am a low-level criminal, and I am using something like WhatsApp to communicate with my other low-level criminals and some higher-level criminals, am I right in thinking that represents, fairly good encryption for protection of those conversations? So I just wonder what makes you want to invest £1,000 a year in the EncroChat handset when you could just be using WhatsApp a bit more cleverly?
I think I know from talking to criminals that they really don't trust WhatsApp, because there have been continual things about WhatsApp being found to be insecure at different times, which, as we know, every sort of bit of software is. We know it has been attacked because it's used so much. So typically people are really, I think the criminals are really nervous about using these well-known ones, but ironically they are secure because they're so well-known. And so WhatsApp will be all over fixing any vulnerabilities in the encryption, and so that is the bet. If you're a criminal, that is the better way to go. Though I'm not saying you should stay legal, Paul.
Isn't Signal the one that everybody's using these days? And Telegram.
Signal
is probably a better option, and that's used by human rights activists and things like that. But again, it's about, do you want to, even if you're a human rights activist, do you want to hide in the noise? And if more people are using WhatsApp, use that.
Is this a bit like Google Plus and Facebook, though? Because like back in the day, I obviously a massive Google fan, quite liked Google Plus, but literally nobody else did. Whereas, of course, all my friends, both of my friends, were over on Facebook, and so it's kind of, maybe if all your criminal mates are on EncroChat, then that's where you have to go to like get the keys or whatever.
The power of the network goes up as more users use it.
The network effect. That's
exactly.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe, rate and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK. Until next time, from all of us, goodbye.
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 Goodbye.